Welcome to part 2 of our meeting. This is the April installment of our Ambassadors and Strategic Advisors meeting. As we said before, we've combined our early April and late April meetings into this virtual online engagement that you can do on your own schedule. The second piece is focusing on the live place types. And really what that means is we're focusing on where we reside, residential areas within our community, our neighborhoods. Our objectives are to develop a greater understanding of the live place types and play place types in part 3. But in this particular section, focusing on linking live to vision, goals, and framework policies, and developing supporting policies and projects and programs to support and promote the live place types. For those of you who may have jumped right into part 2, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of who I am and our team. So starting with the team, I am with MIG. We're a planning and design firm, and we've been really fortunate to be selected by the city to assist the planning staff and other departments and partners in developing the comprehensive plan with the community. We're joined by a fantastic team of national and local experts that include Clarion, City Explained, Economic and Planning Systems, Nelson Nygaard, Pride Public Relations, and Urbane Environments. And this group focuses on all things related to transportation and land use, urban design, markets and economics, modeling of those pieces, thinking about policies to support it, as well as public relations and community engagement. My name is Jay Rankins. I'm a principal with MIG and our firm-wide director of planning and design services, and really excited to be presenting to you today. Our process stems back to early winter 2018, where we focused on our history and existing conditions. We then moved into community vision and values, which kind of wrapped up phase 1. And in phase 2, we talked about the trade-offs associated with growth in order to inform our overall policy framework and future growth strategy. We are now in phase 3, where we're kind of confirming and solidifying that growth strategy. Really putting it through the equity lens and developing policies and strategies to support that, which is really the meat of the plan, the recommendations. So as we're crafting a plan and delivering a draft in fall of this year in preparation for adoption in the spring of 2021, we want to ensure that we're really reflecting what the community's hearing, so giving them plenty of opportunity to respond to that, provide additional input, whether or not they were part of phases 1, 2, and 3. We want to give folks an opportunity to understand what's in the plan, make sure that they agree with it, understand the implications of some of the different policy directives and action strategies, and then really tee us up for implementation moving forward. This is the overall place type palette. It includes 10 place types. So it includes things like our commercial areas and campuses, community activity centers, industrial areas, and importantly for this part of our presentation, part 2, includes parks and preserves, neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2, and I'll explain what those are in a moment. The live place types are part of a family of those 10, the others being work and play. And we feel as though while we are breaking them up in terms of our conversation, we've tackled the workplace types in early March. We're tackling live in part 2 of this activity and play in part 3. We felt as though it was important to highlight that a complete community made up of complete neighborhoods can't just have one type of place. It actually requires some selection of work, live, and play place types to ensure that we have all the things that we need in our daily lives. For the rest of this presentation, though, we'll be focusing on the live place types. So those are place types that represent the different types of places where we live, obviously. And in the palette of 10 place types, that includes neighborhood 1, neighborhood 2, and parks and preserves. And parks and preserves, while we're including them in the live place types, they do serve a very unique function and could support workplace types as well as play place types as well. So starting with neighborhood 1, Our goal for this neighborhood type is to provide places for neighborhoods with a variety of housing types where single family housing is the predominant use. So single family housing can be attached or detached. It can come in the form of accessory dwelling units, perhaps, which are small accessory dwellings on a lot with a single family detached home typically. But the predominant form within the neighborhood one, based on the historical development patterns in Charlotte, is the detached single family home. So that's what you'd think of when you think of a house. But again, they can come in a lot of different forms. The character of this place type is low rise, primarily residential buildings. Usually on a particular street or in a neighborhood, you have homes that are set back relatively to the same amount, and they have generally consistent lot sizes. You may have some variation on the corners. You may have a spot where two lots were combined at some point or never subdivided, but for the most part, they're pretty consistent. Other uses might include civic and institutional uses like schools and parks, embedded right within the neighborhood one category. So these are some images of some typical housing products within the neighborhood one. So you can see almost all of them do represent residential dwelling units, with the exception of number 3, which is a school. So historically, schools, parks, maybe a corner store were a centerpiece to neighborhoods, and so they become part of the fabric of a neighborhood one. So just because a use, it may not be residential, doesn't mean that it can't be part of neighborhood one, but neighborhood one is going to be predominantly residential. Then moving on to neighborhood 2, the goal is to provide a range of moderate to higher intensity housing types, including apartments and condominium buildings, meaning rental and for ownership, to meet the needs of a diverse population. And so land uses here are still going to be predominantly residential, but they include attached product more than detached. So you're thinking about townhomes, apartment buildings, and things where the individual dwellings are actually sharing walls in most cases. And they can include some non-residential uses, particularly in sort of small degrees on the ground floor. And then the place types also include civic uses, again, such as schools, parks, and religious institutions. And the character here is really adaptive reuse of buildings, low to mid-rise single-use structures, whether they're older or newer, and then transitioning to vertically integrated uses in a pedestrian-oriented environment. Translating that planeries to kind of general speak, those are like one structure that might have multiple uses within it, predominantly residential in our neighborhood too, but it could have some office. It might have some retail or a daycare, a dry cleaners on the ground floor, a coffee shop. In a pedestrian-oriented environment, that just means a place that's really walkable. Here's some images of a neighborhood too. Again, mainly residential. You can see now where these are connected structures, duplexes, apartment buildings, townhomes, and you see an image of a church with a play area adjacent to it. Again, other uses, civic, institutional, definitely embedded within the neighborhood 2 place type. And then finally, parks and preserves. The goal here is to protect land that is intended to remain as parks or natural preserves in perpetuity. And you might ask, well, you just mentioned, that parks could be part of neighborhood 1 and 2. So why are they their own place type? Well, these would tend to be larger parks, larger open spaces that are places unto themselves versus a small neighborhood park we would tend to embed within another place type. So the land uses within these are these large public parks, cemeteries, wildlife refuges, nature preserves, and recreational centers and facilities. And there may be some small limited commercial uses compatible with parks and preserves, particularly if they are oriented to the park, maybe serving users of the park or preserve, whatever it may be. And then the character is natural, a lot of green space, heavy tree canopy, accommodating passive and active uses. Structures are limited usually in number and scale, and typically support on-site recreational activities or civic uses. And then the active uses and structures are located so they provide minimal impact to the sensitive environmental features that might be included within a park or preserve. Here's some images. These can be linear, they can be soft and green and landscaped. They may include water features. They could be hardscaped if they're, or portions of them may, to accommodate events, farmers markets. You can see a spray ground here, a splash pad, some people call it. But again, formal, informal recreation, active and passive opportunities to get out and have a refuge from the urban and suburban environments within Charlotte. So available on this within this exercise is a place type summary sheet as in the form of a PDF. These have the characteristics spelled out in more detail, as well as the photo examples. So we'd encourage you to use these as a resource as you participate in the activity associated with this video. Just to give you a little orientation to those place type sheets, here's one example. The top right portion is going to show you sort of the general land use mix. In the residential, or excuse me, in the neighborhood 1 case, it's primarily residential. We also have some parameters, we'd call them, as far as the overall goal, the land use in more detail, the character of the place, and then the typical transportation treatment within the place type. And then eventually we will have graphics that show what the place type is going to be like in a more diagrammatic way. Those are in the works right now. When you flip that over or go to the next page, if you're looking at digitally, we have the transportation section continued in this case, but at the top you can see example images. Those are keyed to the notable characteristics down below. So number 1 here is a typical building in a neighborhood 1 is a low-rise residential building up to 3 or 4 stories. You can look up at the top at the photo with a number 1 on it, and it shows that is that typical height. In this case, actually a split level, it's 1 to 2 stories. So most things we're saying are below the 3 to 4 story mark. And then down below, I pointed out the notable characteristics already, but there's also some suggestion on some of the applicable zoning districts or implications. So the next step is going to be moving forward with the online activity, and the intention there is to get you familiar with the individual live place types in a little greater detail. So there'll be a few questions about that, where you might want to see these neighborhood types in a greater degree moving forward, and then thinking about how do we better implement neighborhood 1, neighborhood 2, and parks and preserved place types with projects, policies, and programs that will support them in the way that you envision moving forward over the next 5, 10, and 20 years. Thanks a lot, and we look forward to talking to you again in part 3.